Hello everybody, my name is Bryan Mercier. I'm a professional Catholic speaker, I'm a Catholic apologist, a retreat leader, and an author. And I'm here giving you a series on prayer. And I'm talking about how to come closer to God, how to increase your relationship with God, and how to have a deeper spirituality in general and be on the path to heaven. Before we get going though on this series, I kind of want to tell you a little bit about my life and my experience. And the prayer does work when we know how to pray and when we know how to use the weapon that God's given us. Now, in my own life, I grew up Catholic. My parents taught me to pray since I was a little kid. And growing up, I started praying for a bike, and I prayed for a bunny, and I prayed for my parents, and I thanked God for the things that I had. And I spent about 2 to 3 minutes a night praying. Now, by the time I got to 14, 15, 16 years old, my prayer life had not changed that much. I continued to thank God and to bless my family and to ask for stuff that I wanted. And by the time I was in high school and college, I didn't really feel close to God. I started going through dark times. I started doubting aspects of my faith. I started asking a lot of questions. How do we know that God exists? How do we know the Bible's true? All of these deep questions. And people always answered me, well, you just have to believe. You just have to have faith. And to me, that's not an answer. That's a cop-out. If Christianity's true and there are real answers, then you better give them to me because I'm somebody who likes to know and I don't want to believe something that's not true. So I went through a turbulent time in my high school years, and I went through a time where I started doubting the faith a little bit. I mean, I always believed in God, but I struggled with belief because I started getting really angry in life. I started getting really confused, really lost, really depressed, and I actually started dressing in black, and I started carrying weapons, and I started wanting to hurt people. I wrote poems about it, about hurting people, about killing people, and really dark stuff. My mind was becoming very dark in its thinking. And every single day I was angry. Every single day I was depressed. Every single day I was looking for more. I carried a 1,000-pound heart through life every day. And I'm like, is this all there is to life? I wanted happiness. And don't get me wrong. I mean, when I was hanging out with my friends and when I was playing video games, I was happy. But these were more like drugs covering up the inside of me, which I didn't like. The inside of me, which I found unhappy. And so I was on a constant quest for happiness. And I was getting darker and darker. And my parents were getting concerned about me. And my mother would pray for me every night and every day. She would sacrifice for me. She would offer things up for me. And my mother would literally cry in the night when I wouldn't come home. I'd make her cry at other times, and she would really have a hard time. And she really would just keep persevering in prayer. And I should make it known too that ever since I was 2 years old, I never stopped praying. Even through the dark times, I prayed. Even through the lonely times, I prayed. Even through the difficult, angry, depressed times, I prayed. In fact, I didn't even look in a mirror for 7 years at one point because I hated what I saw. I literally thought I was the ugliest person on planet Earth. I thought I was the worst person in the world. I'd never get a girlfriend. I'd never get married, nothing. And so my self-esteem was in the bottom of the barrel. It was the rock bottom. It was the worst. And all through these times, I continued to pray, even when I didn't believe in God, even when I struggled with belief in God, even when I didn't think he was listening to me, and even when I was angry at him, I kept praying, and I kept praying, and so did my mother, and so did my dad, and eventually my mom sent me out to this Catholic school, Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio, and this is where I actually would find God. This is where I actually experienced God, where he came into my life in a really powerful way. I always like to say that during my times, my years, where I didn't think that God was listening to me, he would take my prayers and he would put them in this box called a Bryan box. It had my name on it. And he would just put these prayers in the box and he would hold them there until I was ready. Less angry, less hateful, less wanting to kill people. And when I was more ready to receive him. Now, he wanted to come into my life. He wanted to come into my life a lot, except that my life was full of other things. It was full of all this stuff that's not from him. And so he had to wait, in a sense, until I was ready. And when I got all this stuff out of me, and then he moved in and changed my life. So God came into my life in a really powerful way. And it literally turned me inside out and backwards. He gave me more happiness that I could have found in 10 lifetimes. He gave me more peace, more fulfillment, more joy, everything that I had been looking for. He took away my sadness. He took away my pain. He took away my heartbreak. He took away my anger and my hate, and he literally transformed me inside out and gave me a whole new life. Now, that was the beginning of my prayer journey with God. I had already started praying more out at this Catholic school and really trying to give myself to him more. So out of my school, this was the kind of school where they were a little bit more charismatic in nature. Some were very traditional, some were very charismatic, but just learning to open my hands to God, learning to open my hands was symbolic of me learning to open up my heart to God, open up my life to God, to give him a chance even when I lost trust in him, even when I couldn't. So literally just me giving myself to God more and more and more over those months and months and months out at that school. God was giving himself to me more and more and more. And then one day he would come into my life in a way that would transform it upside down, inside out, and backwards. And that was the first day of the rest of my life. Now, my life since has been completely different. Before this, I knew of God as some person way out in heaven or some cosmic being who was there, who loved me, but I didn't really know God. This experience and my profound reversion experience really helped me to know God, to love God, to have a relationship with him, to experience him, to hear him when he speaks, and really to change the way I think. Now, some people are like, wait, what do you mean that you can hear God when he speaks to you? And what do you mean that you know God on a personal level? But that's just it, because since these days, I've learned how to pray. Since those days, I've learned how to encounter God. I've learned how to experience God. I've learned how to know him on a deeper level. And I've learned how to listen to his still small voice speaking to my heart. And we're going to be opening these up over the next bunch of episodes in this series. But a long story short, a really interesting story. I was actually going into the woods to read one day in my town, and as I was heading into the woods to read, God spoke to me and he told me to turn around and go down and read down by the hospital. And so I turned around and I started going in that direction, and it was about a quarter of a mile away. And I was on my way there and I was thinking, God, the hospital's under construction. I was like, is that where you want me to go? And I was like, literally there's a fence around it, and the only place I can go has a patch of grass with a fire hydrant on it. Is that where you want me to go, God? And I felt in my heart that God said, yes, go there. So I said, okay. So I had to come down this really big hill. And then when you get down the hill, you cross the street to the other side. Now, even before I got to the street to cross it, I was coming down the hill. And as I was coming down the hill, I could see a guy on the other side of the street standing on the patch of grass next to the fire hydrant. And when I say I saw a big guy, I'm talking a huge guy who was like a refrigerator with like a little head on top. He was like all muscles, and he had scars on his faces, and he was bald and crazy looking. And even before I got to the street, this guy calls out to me and he says, hey, you. And I said, yeah. He said, are you a Christian? I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. He said, are you a Catholic? I said, yeah, I'm a Catholic. And he said, do you read the Bible? And I said, yeah, I read the Bible. And he said, good, come on over here. And so I go over to the guy on the other side of the street, and he tells me that he had got out of prison for the first time in like 15 years. And he had been in prison for a really, really long time, and he had prayed in prison for God to forgive him, and he never felt God. He never heard God. It felt like God was ignoring him. And he said, somebody gave me a rosary in prison, and I prayed it every day, and God never answered my prayers. I just want to know that I can be forgiven. I just want to know that God can give me a second chance, that I can start over again, and kind of be his child. And I said, I can help you with that. See, most people teach us how to say prayers, but they never teach us how to connect with God. They never teach us really how to make that prayer work and how to get that connection. So I said, I'll pray for you, and I'll get that connection for you to God, and all you have to do is repeat after me. He said, all right, that sounds great. So we go down to downtown where we lived, and I said, kneel down, and he knelt down. And at that point, I started praying, and I said, Lord Jesus, and he said, Lord Jesus. I said, I'm so sorry for all my sins. He repeated, I'm so sorry for all my sins. I promise never to do them again. So I'm leading him through this whole prayer. And about halfway through the prayer, I'm praying my heart out for this guy, that God strike this guy with lightning or something big happens to him. But about halfway through the prayer, I was like, is this guy even taking me seriously? I mean, maybe he's like ADD and watching birds or something, or maybe he's just, saying the words but not really taking it seriously. So I decided I was going to open my eyes just a little bit to see what this guy was doing. Open my eyes a little bit just to see if he was really taking it seriously. And again, maybe it's because I was praying my heart out for this guy, but when I opened my eyes, what I saw blew me away. I opened them up just a little bit and looked over at this guy, and his whole entire shirt was completely soaking wet. Had a huge round circle. Apparently, he had been crying like a baby the whole time, and I didn't even hear him. So much so that the tears were bouncing off his shirt and bouncing onto both of his pant legs. And this guy had been crying like a little baby, which was interesting because at that moment, all I could think of was I was going into the woods to read. God spoke to my heart, told me to turn around. There's someone down there I needed help. So I go down a quarter of a mile away, and there's a man down there who's a really big, crazy looking guy who really needs Jesus. And I ended up praying with him, and his whole life has turned around, and he actually experienced God in a really powerful, profound way. And that was amazing because I wasn't even going in that direction. And so that's how God works if we listen. We'll have a whole show on how to listen to God, how to recognize his voice. How do you know when he speaks to you? But for now, we got to say at the beginning that when we know God, he works. He doesn't always work the way we want. He always doesn't give us what we want because he knows what's best, but he does work in our lives, and he's always there for us. I want to tell you a few more stories that I think are really interesting to show that God works and to show that the power of prayer works. There's a woman I know. She's a world healer, a world traveler, and her name is Sister Bryan Mercier. She actually travels the world and heals people from things like blindness, from things like diseases, from, people who can't walk, people who have deformed faces. I mean, she has a whole book called Miracles Do Happen, and it's about her power of prayer. Now, she was a doubter in the beginning. She didn't believe in really that God could work in that way, and she definitely didn't believe that God could work through her. But through many, many, many series of events where God tried to get her attention and eventually started working through her, now she travels the world and heals people in Jesus' name, miraculous things many times, because God is real. God's not dead. He's not outdated. He's not superstitious. God's real, and he really loves us, and he really can work in our lives if we believe. Now, people, like even Jesus said, if you believe with the faith of a mustard seed, you could see great things happen. Even Jesus said you have to have great faith to see great works. Many of us don't have great faith. A lot of us just have faith barely hanging on, much less believing to create the miraculous. But there are people like Sister Bryan, Father Fernando Suarez, and other worldwide healers who actually heal people from some of the most crazy things. In fact, I know a story of a nun from France, and she had Parkinson's disease. She actually was on her way out. She couldn't move her fingers anymore. She couldn't write. She couldn't work. She couldn't sleep well. She couldn't, all she could basically do was sit in a wheelchair and watch her sisters work and pray all day because this disease had crippled her body. And she remembered at that moment that Pope John Paul II had died from the same disease. Pope John Paul II died from Parkinson's disease. So when she thought of that, she actually prayed really hard to Pope John Paul II. She said, hey, he's in heaven with Jesus, so he can take my prayers and go to Jesus and kneel down before him and pray for me to him. And so in doing that, she was healed on the spot from her Parkinson's disease. And in fact, she went to so many doctors, she went to neurologists, she went to all of these different tests, and all of these tests had proved that she was completely healed. Today, she can write, she can actually work, she can take long car rides, she can sleep, she can do all the things that she couldn't do before because she had great faith. I want to tell one more cool story. There was one story, a true story about World War II. In World War II, the United States dropped 2 bombs on Japan in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And in those 2 locations, in Nagasaki, we'll say, there was a house full of priests. And these priests prayed the rosary every single day for protection, they said. And during that war, when the bomb dropped right on that area, these priests were only a few blocks from where the bomb dropped, and everything within eyes sight was destroyed. In fact, an atomic bomb so hot it literally annihilates everything in the area, and only the shadows remain, and that falls to the ground. And people in Japan died from over 100 miles away from the radiation, and yet only a few blocks away from the blast, there was one house of Franciscan priests that are still there today, and they're completely and perfectly fine because they prayed the rosary every single day for protection. And in fact, in Hiroshima, in the exact same place, if you look at in Hiroshima, there was another brother house of priests a few blocks from the blast that also is still there today, and they had over 200 doctors and scientists check out these men to figure out how and why it's possible that they're still alive. And you can look up this story for yourself. It's really quite miraculous, but it shows that prayer can work. God can work. God does work. And again, he doesn't answer every single one of our prayers. I don't know if you've seen this movie, Bruce Almighty. I don't really recommend it, but they did make one interesting point in the movie where if God answered all of our prayers, because Jim Carrey, he's an actor, he actually became God in the movie. And unlike God, who doesn't give us everything we want, Jim Carrey decided to give everyone everything they wanted. And in fact, it turned the whole world into chaos because everybody prayed to win the lottery. And then when they won, they were so excited, they were overjoyed that they were going to have millions of dollars. But since Jim Carrey gave everyone they want, everyone won, and everyone only got a penny because they had to split it between them. And then all these riots happened. Everyone was getting upset, and things didn't turn out the way they planned. And so we have to, in our quest for God, we have to learn to come to know that God knows everything that's best, and he has our good in mind. Now, coming close to God is not only for priests and nuns. It's not only for, the saints who are already in heaven. It's for every single person. Some people mistakenly think that they can't have deep prayer life with God, that they can't really have these miraculous experiences. In fact, every single person on earth, no matter who you are called to have a relationship with God, to have a deep union and intimacy with him. And in doing this, this is our life. This is our goal. This is what God's called us to. After all, that's why he created us, to be in relationship with him, to have this relationship with him. And over the next few episodes, we're going to be unfolding how to talk to God, how to listen, how to know him on a deeper level, and the things that prevent us from coming to him. So stay tuned on our journey to prayer, stay tuned for our journey to the heart of God, and stay tuned for a greater, deeper, more fulfilling spirituality. We thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
To all of the viewers of Shalom TV throughout the world, I want to encourage you not only to support this amazing media apostolate, but to spread the word to others. We all know how the internet and mass media are polluting the world with the poison of pornography and so much other forms of materialism. This is the source of eternal life, the gospel, and Shalom TV is consecrated to spreading the word of Christ. Thank you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.